Well, thanks very much, Sarah, and let me echo Sarah's thanks to all of you for joining the call this afternoon. I think the last time we talked was April the 1st. I've talked to some of you since that time, but as a group, and we had just passed the CARES Act, and we were still working through what was in it, trying to push to make sure the money actually gets out, which we are still doing. We've seen some of it move since that time, but clearly that's something we need to continue to push on because I know how much it's needed. I wanted to talk to all of you again because, as I'm sure you're aware, Congress is also working on another package of assistance, and so I wanted to get some input from all of you. There are some pretty significant funds in the package that was introduced in the House yesterday for state and local governments. It includes $500 billion for state governments to use over the next several years to not only cover pandemic-related expenses, but also to replace lost revenue and respond to the negative impact. So the money there in that state and local fund is pretty flexible. For local governments, it's got $375 billion for county and local governments, with $250 million to be made available within 30 days of enactment, and the remaining $125 billion a year later. And just to be clear, to go back to the $500 billion, $250 billion of that would be due in May of 2021. So it's looking not just at the current crisis, but anticipating that as a result of where we are now, there will be needs in the future. The bill also includes hazard pay for essential workers, including healthcare, emergency responders, sanitation workers. A number of other folks are in that category. It includes additional money for small business programs, for grants to small businesses through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It includes $175 billion in housing assistance. It includes an additional $100 billion for hospitals and healthcare providers, and an additional $75 billion for testing and contact tracing. And it includes additional stimulus checks of $1,200 per family member, and $10 billion for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the SNAP program, to try and help families cover the cost of food. So that's very briefly what's in the package. We are still going through it ourselves, and we're certainly willing to share this outline with all of you, as well as the funding that New Hampshire is still getting from the CARES relief package, and of course the follow-up to that, which provided mainly funding for small businesses, but did have an additional $100 billion for health care, $75 for hospitals, healthcare providers, and $25 billion to go for testing. So of that, $67 million just got released today for the state of New Hampshire. It's more than we thought we were going to get for the state, so that's good news. It's $61 million for testing, and that will go to HHS to determine how to distribute it. So again, we have the chart broken down, or the list broken down of all of these funds. If you don't have it, please let us know that. We have been trying to get it out to everyone. And let me, again, say what I've said to many of you, and in the last time we were together, that I appreciate that states and local governments are really on the front lines of this pandemic, and my goal in Washington is to try and do as much as I can to help support all of you in the effort to address this. And let me just say, we included several other towns today because they are very large, and even though they're not incorporated as cities, we thought it would be helpful to have folks from Derry, Londonderry, Salem, and Merrimack on the call so they could hear the same information. So I'm going to stop with that and open it up to hear your thoughts and concerns, and recognizing that I think one of the challenges as this bill comes from the House to the Senate is going to be deciding what happens with funding to help state and local governments. That was, as you may remember, was a fight in the third COVID-19 package, the CARES legislation. It's one of the things that delayed it for several days, and I expect it to continue to be an issue in this upcoming package. That's why I was so interested in hearing from all of you what your challenges are, what your needs are, and how we can be most helpful. So thank you very much. And Sarah, I don't know, are you going to run through the list of folks?
Yes, I will. Just a reminder to folks, if you would please mute your line while you're not speaking. That will help us with some feedback and background noise. And I'm going to start with Mayor Craig.
Sarah, before you do, can we just introduce everybody on the staff who's on the phone, because many of those people are there to follow up with all of you who are listening in. So in addition to Sarah, I know she's the state director in New Hampshire for my office. We have in New Hampshire Madison Lightfoot, Peter Clark, and in Washington we have Ariel Marshall, who is my legislative director, Peter Fies, who works on healthcare issues along with Peter Clark, Erica Anholt, Kevin Travellini, Robert Henson, and Ami Kudson, who is my assistant. So again, thank to all of the staff for joining us, and I know we will, because you're on, we'll be able to follow up with questions and concerns that people have.
Definitely. Great. Mayor Craig.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Senator Shaheen. I just want to start off by thanking you for continuing to reach out to all of us and for advocating for us at the city and town level. We are seeing, the hit locally from a financial perspective. As you know, COVID-19 hit at a time when we're almost done with our fiscal budget this year, and so any assistance that we can get will be tremendously helpful as we are anticipating a decrease in revenues. So I have two questions. One is, from a FEMA perspective, typically they'll reimburse 75% our communities, and we know that there has been a request in for a waiver for them to cover 100%, and I was wondering if you happen to know where that stands.
I don't. I assume it's something that will be considered as part of the package. I haven't seen that it's in what was in the House package. Kevin Travellini or Ariel, who are on the phone, do either of you know the answer to that question?
Hi, Senator. This is Ariel, and Kevin jump in, but that's the question and answer that I don't know, but we can get that information to you.
Great. Yeah, I think we have to continue to go through the bill and see if it's in there. If not, it's certainly something that I understand why people are concerned about it, and we will see if we can't raise it for the package when it comes to the Senate.
Wonderful. And then my second question is regarding the airport. Again, as a result of your advocacy, Manchester Boston Regional Airport saw about will be seeing $12 million coming in. But where we're competing with larger airports in the area, we're at a disadvantage. And I was just curious if there's any more funding that you know of that will be coming to the mid to smaller size airports.
Again, I don't know of any at this point, but it's something that as we're looking at continued transportation needs, I think we ought to be thinking about. And I know there were some issues with how the last package of funding got distributed to airports, which I talked to Ted Kitchens. I share some of those frustrations with why there were certain airports who got more than we did, given their lack of commercial flights. So I think it's an issue we're going to continue to work on.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Craig. Moving next to Mayor Carrier.
Yes. Good afternoon, Senator Shaheen.
Hi, Bob.
Thank you. One question I have, and this may be a little off base, but, we're going to have revenue shortfalls. Obviously, we're going to be creating different budgets next year to accommodate for that and all. And with the money, the relief money that's coming from the federal government through the state, whatever the state can provide, one of the things in the back of my mind that I worry about is, what are the repercussions with all this money, billions and trillions of dollars that are coming for relief? what kind of repercussions is the government going to have to put it back in the coffers? I mean, what kind of things tax-wise are people going to face at a later date?
Yeah, Bob, that's a really good question and a huge challenge. I can tell you that everybody I talk to, from economists to government officials, both in the current administration and previous administrations, all say that the most important thing we can do is try and first help people get through this emergency period, and second, to provide stimulus and support to our economy, to small businesses, to those industries that are such a critical part of our economy. And at some point down the road, we are going to have to address the deficit and debt that we've created, but right now is not the time to do that because that would make the situation worse. We saw that. I mean, the best example we've got is going back to the Great Depression when the policies of the government were to reduce spending as opposed to try and inject funding into the economy so that businesses and people could survive. So it's an important question, one we need to keep in mind, but for right now, I think what's critical is that we provide help to people who are really struggling.
Well,
and
thank
businesses.
you. Yes, and I understand that. And one thing also with that is that I wouldn't want the United States to be considered as a weaker country because we're in this economic downfall, more or less. So it's just a concern that way. It's in the back of my mind that way. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Carrier. Just a reminder again to folks, please put your phone on mute if you're not speaking. We're still hearing a lot of background noise from folks, so appreciate that. Next up, Mayor Boulay.
Jim probably has his phone on mute.
Don't forget to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Hey, now I'm back. Okay.
There you go.
I just want you to know I was paying attention to the whole mute stuff. Senator, thank you for taking time for us today. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank
you. Before I start, I just want to say a real sincere thank you on behalf of the whole city to your staff. They have been incredible to work with. The amount of information coming out of your office has been extremely helpful as we go through putting together our budget for the next fiscal year. So thank you. They've been fabulous and extremely responsive.
Thank you.
I have but one thing, and that is, as we're going through the budget process, we found one of the questions that we're considering is our capital budget and our capital projects. We have several transportation projects, red-listed bridges, et cetera. And as you look at the stimulus packages when they come, we're going to be looking for, how much money will there be potentially for infrastructure-type projects, those shovel-ready projects, and what will the process be for the distribution of those dollars when they come. So it's just something to flag for you, and otherwise, thank you so much for everything you're doing.
Thanks, Jim. And I don't know, I haven't seen anything from the House package that talks about infrastructure investment and transportation. I don't know, Ariel or Robert, have either of you, anybody on the call, seen any of those provisions yet?
Yeah, Senator, this is Kate.
Good.
The House bill that was released yesterday actually included $15 billion in grants to support the ongoing work of state and territorial departments of transportation. And this is to mitigate the effects of COVID. As we're seeing, our office has been in close communication with New Hampshire Department of Transportation Commissioner Sheehan and talking about some of the ongoing needs to meet highway and transportation projects, and the Senator did prioritize that in her request to leadership in this next package. And so as conversations continue and we get more of a sense of what that funding is going to look like and how it will be distributed to states if it is secured in the final package, we're happy to keep you in the loop there.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and you know what, Jim, if there's this particular aspect, I know you mentioned bridges, and we've done some of the Concord bridges that were not in great shape, that have gotten better. But if there are specific asks for transportation dollars, it would be helpful to us to know what it is. Is it for buses, for bridges, for mass transit, trails, whatever? Sharing that would be helpful to us.
Okay, will do.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Boulay. Mayor Hilliard, were you able to join?
I was able to join. Thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you,
Hey,
Senator.
Dana.
Sorry
Nice to have you on.
Nice to speak to you. Yes, I was on earlier, but I'm at the middle school and my phone kicked me out. You know how public schools work sometimes. So,
so you're the reason for the noise, right?
You guys.
Just kidding.
We got to upgrade our system. Maybe you guys can help us with that. With that, thank you. I did forward a bunch of questions, so I won't ask that. I know your staff is already working on that. But just to plant a little seed with you as that bill moves forward. The great equalizer in education is the public school buildings themselves. And when students arrive, we are then able to take that inequality within society and at least equalize it out for everyone to have that gain of really reaching their individualized goals. With the unknown, still looming out there as we move forward towards the fall, what most school districts have learned is with going remote is that inequality then comes back, because then students are back into those socioeconomic gaps which exist within our society, and that causes loss and that causes great stressors. And of course, one of those great stressors is not having a device, especially when we're with remote learning. So the possibilities of exploring funding or certainly help of ensuring that if school districts need to go remote, that there will be reimbursement or at least some money that we can provide those students who do not have access to technology with technology to again take that inequality that exists when they're not in the school building and at least equalize it out when they're back at home.
Yeah, Dana, boy, I think that's
I know
one
it's
of
a big
the
one.
No, it's one of the really important lessons, I think, from what's going on right now from this pandemic, is that both in terms of education and the disparities that exist between those communities that have high-speed internet and those that don't, and this has been a challenge that I've worked on in New Hampshire from the days that I was governor, and we still don't have high-speed internet to everybody who needs it and the technology to be able to use it. And one of the things that I'm hearing from people in healthcare is how effective telehealth has been, and how after we get through this healthcare emergency, we got to make sure we do a better job at using telehealth and pricing the services on telehealth in the same way that we do other services. So I think it's really important. I know that there was some money in the CARES package, not enough to make a dent, but what I think we've got to do is what we did in the 30s and have the same commitment to high-speed internet for every American as we did for every household and access to electricity. So again, I'm not sure what's in the House bill, but I think at some point we're going to have an infrastructure package that is going to be significant, and that needs to be one of the pieces of it.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Hilliard. Next, we have Mayor Beckstead from Portsmouth.
Hello. Good afternoon,
Hi,
Senator. And I just want to thank both you and your staff for everything that you've done with the community. You've been in great response when staff is looking for something. I don't really have any, per se, questions. Just I want to express, and I have expressed to Congressman Pappas, who I had worked with a little bit with getting information from other communities and mayors when the bill was being put together. Portsmouth is a small community with very large expectations at the state level. I mean, we're one of the biggest drivers when it comes to the room and meals tax, amongst other things, to be able to provide to the entire state. Our community being small seems to always have little funding. It's usually based on a lot of the things, and some of the CARE Act money that we received was based on population. We don't take into account that, yes, we are a community of 20,000 people, but on any given day, working throughout with the PDA and within our community, we can be 50 to 60,000. So it's kind of an unfair advantage to us. We're in the middle of our budget process. I am afraid, and I have stressed this before, with some of the levels that we're looking at and creating cuts. It's going to cut positions that I'm worried about that actually we are expecting to do their very best today. Our teachers, our first responders, fire and police, and our staff. A great deal of important. And the last thing that this community needs is to be able to do those cuts. So this funding process is so crucial. And I understand that the time frame isn't going to be back to the Senate until after Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. We can only hold so long as a community before we have to make the decision to do a budget that is fair to both the residents and to the community. Timing is of the essence of this last package, to be able to get this thing up and running and get it out to the community so we can make confident decisions for our community.
Well, thank you, Rick. I think that's very well said. The timing is a huge issue. One of the things that's in that House bill is hazard pay, as I mentioned, to help what they're calling the Heroes Fund, to help those people who have been on the front lines, first responders, sanitation workers, those essential workers. And so I think there is a real bipartisan commitment to trying to provide help for those folks, because as you point out, if we don't do that, they're going to start seeing layoffs. In fact, I don't know if I haven't heard of any cities in New Hampshire that have started to lay people off, first responders off, but I know it's something that people are maybe forced to think about. So I think we got to pass this as soon as possible.
Well, and just to add to that, Senator, if I may, and when you're going amongst making your arguments for this thing, again, if we are forced to go and cut some of these first responders, teachers and stuff to be able to somewhat be fair to our community, unemployment is what is going to be the next crunch. And I believe all of the unemployment from this package of everything from previous runs out the end of July. So now they're going to be opening up another can of worms. So just one more piece of advice to give to you that you really could use and point that out if you so choose.
Yeah, no, a very important point. You can take it away from one hand, but you're going to have to give it with the other hand.
Exactly. So thank you very much for everything you do, Senator. I very much appreciate these phone calls.
Good. Thank you, Mayor Bexted. Mayor Lovett from Claremont.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Senator Shaheen, I'd like to echo everything that's been said with regard to all of the hard work and effort you and your staff have done on behalf of all of the communities across the state. They've just been wonderful.
Thanks, Charlene. I appreciate that, and I know they all do too.
Well, I just can't say it enough. But anyway, I don't want to spend a lot of time reiterating what has already been said. I think every municipality has the same concerns about loss of revenue and how to build a budget as we go into the next FY with those unknowns. I've been talking to a lot of the social service organizations in the community to find out, beyond the city administration's concerns with regard to loss of revenue, what their concerns are. And there's two items that I thought you might be able to work on, and that is social service organizations like Turning Point Networks. You know, they rely, a lot of their budget relies on fundraising events. Well, they've had to cancel those fundraising events because of COVID-19. They can get through this FY, but going into the next FY, they're going to be even relying heavier on other funding sources such as Department of Justice grants. But those are somewhat restrictive in that they require that any funding distributed be for direct services only. Can that be loosened up a little bit to cover administrative services, because these organizations will not have the fundraising dollars that they would have had we not been hit by COVID-19?
Yeah, that's an important point. And it's not one that I have heard before. I don't know, either Peter Clark or Peter Fies, if this is something that you all have heard, and if you have any sense of whether the House did anything on that. But it's something I think we ought to take a look at.
Thank you. And then the other thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Senator, can folks hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Go ahead.
This is Kevin.
Oh, good, Kevin.
Senator Shaheen's office. I apologize. I was having some technology issues earlier, but that is an issue that we're aware of and we've heard about. We're working on our side in the Senate with the Senate Judiciary Committee to see if it's going to be possible for new language in a potential package on the Senate side that would make that change. I'm still reviewing the House bill to see if the change has been made, but I don't believe they included that specifically in the legislation.
But as you point out, even if it's only for a short term to get people through the emergency, that's really important because they haven't been able to do their fundraising. So thanks,
Thank
Kevin.
you. So the other question, Senator Shaheen, has to do with CDBGs. It's quite a process from the time that you apply for those grants to the time the dollars actually come into the community.
Mm-hmm.
And is there I know the request has been made to HUD to waive some of those regulations, because the timeline can be anywhere from 6 months to a year before the dollars get into the communities. The response from HUD was no, but it's not helping us. And the projects are shovel ready, but they still need to go through this whole process that's very laborious, and taking a year is not going to help us in the current situation.
No, it's not. And again, that's another one where I think we ought to take a look at whether we can get something short term to help communities. I do have a list in front of me that shows that the Claremont Housing Authority is going to get over $34,000, and the in housing through the Public Housing Operating Fund, and the Choice Voucher Program is going to provide another $19,500. So those numbers we know are committed.
Right, but what I was referring to was some of the feedback that I got from Southwestern Community Services
about the application process and the challenges with that. I think that is something we need to take a look at.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Thank you, Mayor Lovett. Mayor McCarley from Rochester.
Hi, thanks. And thanks, Senator Shaheen. And I would certainly echo a number of the other mayors who are in the middle of their budget process. And I think that we live under a tax cap budget where we've been okay the last few years because we've had a lot of increased revenues because things have looked good. And obviously a lot of that is not the case this year. So it's going to be tough. But I did want to specifically mention, and it's really echoing a little bit of what Dana said. I've had a lot of conversations with our superintendent of schools, and we have a fairly significant free and reduced lunch population here, and we have a decent percentage of kids who are on special needs programs. Mm-hmm. And my fear is, in talking to our superintendent, that as hard a work is going on the remote learning side of things, that they're going to our kids that are most vulnerable and we're always the most concerned about are the ones most likely to be having the hardest time through this. And I've talked to the governor about it, and he has assured me money will be no issue in terms of getting the resources for these kids. But I really wonder when special ed budgets roll in and they're having to do repeat special ed for OT and PT, a lot more mental health counseling. I'm just genuinely concerned that our public schools are going to be so overburdened that none of us have quite got our heads around it yet. And so while I like flexible money, I also think a notion of having some that's very specific to those populations is important to think about.
I agree, a really good point. And I know that we've heard from a number of educators in New Hampshire who are concerned about the current challenges with the remote learning and thinking about how we continue to provide those special services. I know there have been some people who have called for a rollback of IDEA. I don't think that's the answer. And
I would agree. That would not be my direction either.
Yeah.
But I know it's complicated, and I will say again, the governor has been very articulate about his concerns about these kids and what we're going to do once school gets back. So it's not suggesting that the state is not paying attention. sometimes worry that we fall back on old ways to deal with it that are sort of formulaic, old, and maybe we need some more creative thinking on it. So that's it, I guess.
Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Mayor McCarley. I don't know, Erica, are you on, and have you seen anything that's been proposed that you think would help address this?
Yes, Senator. So the bill that the House released yesterday includes substantial funding for elementary and secondary schools, but it is, as the CARES Act funding was, very flexible funding that can be used for a variety of different reasons, and there is no funding in the House bill, at least at this point, specifically designated for special education, for example. That is something that your office has been calling for, that you've been calling for, and certainly very aware that there needs to be increased support on that front specifically, in addition to everywhere else that there are needs.
No, and I realize, I could go through a tons longer list, but I just kind of wanted to reiterate that one. Thank you very much for your help.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor McCarley. Do we have Mayor Grenier on the line?
Hello, Senator Shaheen. How are you?
Hey, Mayor. I'm good. I'm down in Washington. I'd like to be up in Berlin with you.
Yeah, I don't blame you. We kind of have a couple of different issues that we're dealing with here. We obviously plan for the absolute worst, like all the other communities that are on the conference call. But we've only had 2 confirmed cases of COVID, and we've had a few scares of some tests. But what has happened is that, Androscoggin Valley Hospital and the hospitals in the other parts of the county have all not taken surgeries and provided the services that generate cash flow for them. So I'm definitely afraid that our hospitals' backs are up against the wall. And I know that there's been some funding already earmarked for the hospitals, but I don't really think that that's going to be enough. And my second point is Berlin's been allocated $246,000 for COVID-related expenses, but the strings for those expenses are pretty stringent. And because we haven't had the huge outbreak, that might be money that we couldn't use, that we certainly could plug holes somewhere else in our budget.
Sorry, Mayor, I was on mute. It's one of the challenges that I have continued to hear since the last time we had our conference call, at which point I was more optimistic that the dollars that we were sending back in the state funds, that $1.25 billion, were going to be able to be used flexibly by the state and by local governments. And Treasury has issued guidance that was very specific that said no, it could not be used for that. Now, in the monies that's in the House bill, it is definitely flexible. And there are dollars that can be used for both to address funds that have already been spent for COVID-19, but also to address other budget considerations. So I think that is an issue not just for you in Berlin, but for so many other people, and something that we've got to continue to work on so we can provide funding that you all can use, because I'm assuming many of you have used dollars that were budgeted for other things to respond to the pandemic and the economic fallout, and so now you're short in those areas. So hopefully we can get more flexibility in what's done next, and that's what I'm going to be pushing for.
Great. Other than that, we're kind of on a hold pattern. We're waiting for the shoe to drop and hoping that it doesn't.
Yes, very well said. And I know that the governor is looking at working with hospitals to begin to open up for some of those other voluntary surgeries and other needs that they have. I actually talked to a number of nurses yesterday about the challenges, and one of the things they pointed out was that they are beginning to see people come back to the hospitals for needing care, and that one of the challenges is that in some of those cases the workforce isn't there because of furloughs. So hopefully we are going to see people come back to the hospitals so that they can begin to make up some of those dollars that have been lost.
Right. Lastly, another concern that I have, of course, I serve as Coos County Commissioner, and with the stipends that we're able to give our frontline workers, the counties have had to pick up, and the municipalities will have to pick up the costs related to payroll to pay these employees the extra $300 and $150, and cash-strapped communities and counties like us, if you don't pay it, we're the bad guys. If you do pay it, your budget is in trouble.
Yeah, let me just make sure I understand that, Mayor. I understood that the $300 in the state fund is coming from state dollars as opposed to needing to be picked up by communities. Are you saying that has created a challenge so that you now have to meet that in terms of other employees?
Well, no. The stipends for our first-line responders, I think, is coming from CARES Act money filtered through the state, but it's only for the stipend. But we still have to pick up, payroll taxes and.
Oh, I see.
And Group 1 employees.
I got it.
You have to pick up FICA and Medicare expenses, and we run a pretty tight budget. If you deny that expense, boy, you destroy morale of your community.
Well, so what you're saying is if we're going to provide those additional funds, then we need to provide the whole package, not just the $300 bonus piece.
Correct.
Got it.
That puts us in an untenable situation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. This is the first time I heard that was not being covered too. So I don't know, Robert or Madison or Peter Clark, I don't know if any of you have heard anything, but maybe we could look into this and just see how big an issue that is and why it's not being covered.
Sure, Senator. We're happy to look into this. I know that what New Hampshire has done with those stipends is sort of unique, and so it may not be an issue that is replicated elsewhere in the country. So it may be unique to New Hampshire and one that we can look into.
Great. So we'll get back to you, Mayor, on that.
Thanks. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you, Mayor Grenier. Mayor Ginta, do we have you on the line?
Hi. Yes, I am.
Hi, Mayor.
Good afternoon, Senator. Good afternoon. Hi. I'm sorry to be repetitive here, but I wanted to also say that a great job your staff is doing. Not only are they doing a great job, but during this whole pandemic, with all the extra things that come added to it, they're still just not missing a beat. And I wanted to add one other piece. Not only are they getting back to me, and I'm sure every other mayor on this phone call, but they're also reaching out to constituents where I don't have all the answers. And I'm saying, please contact the senator's office, and here's a contact for you. And I can see the emails go back and forth. So it's tremendously appreciated from our small businesses, too, who are in a panic at this stage, and they have someone to talk to and someone who's helping them. So I wanted to add that piece as well. So kudos to all of your staff.
Well, thank you. And you can never be too repetitive when you're thanking the staff.
You're right. You are absolutely right, which is the reason I did it. Thank you for saying that. And so I share in everything that you've already heard from the other mayors. Mayor Grenier, I love when he uses those little terms. Waiting for the shoe to drop is one. And I've been talking offline with Mayor Boulay down in Concord. We are all worried about what this budget season is going to bring to us. And so what I wanted to share with you is as we're preparing for this, I'm sending out all of the red flags that I possibly can. And it doesn't seem like it's making much of a dent with my council or my city manager. No, that's not any kind of a slight against them. They just feel as though people are going to be paying their taxes come July 1. I am not as convinced that that's going to happen. Our unemployment rate right now in the city of Franklin is approaching 30%.
Wow.
And if I was part of that 30%, I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be sending a check come July 1. And so it's a situation that has me up at night. And so I'm sorry for the long story in the background.
No,
but what I wanted to share
that.
with you, just giving you a little bit of color of what's happening. As you say, we're on the front lines. And so with that, Governor Sununu has been speaking with us on a weekly basis as well. And something that he's continued to talk about is the $1.25 billion that we already have. So I know that there are monies that may come. There are bills that now are under construction that may pass. But we do have that $1.25 billion. Right. And he's been very uncomfortable with the ability to be able to utilize those monies to send them back to cities and towns. He's willing to do so, but he still doesn't have sort of firm ground to be able to send those money back just yet. In our last call, he said he was working with Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, to see if he could get a little bit of better footing so that it would allow him to open up those purse strings and start sending it back if need be. Not only to supplement the state budget from revenue losses, but also if it helps the state budget, it helps local budgets, right? Because so much money flows from rooms and meals and gas tax. So I ask you, have you been working with Governor Sununu to talk with Secretary Mnuchin to see if they can open up those rules and allow monies to flow more easily to municipalities?
You know what? I have not had a conversation with the governor about that specifically, but now that you raise it, I will do that, and we will also talk to Secretary Mnuchin because, as I said, there was guidance issued in terms of the flexibility to use those funds to backfill budgets. But it wasn't clear to me, and Robert, you may know the answer to this, it wasn't clear to me that that guidance said prohibited states from sending money directly to communities.
No, not to my knowledge. In fact, I think that's kind of the idea that
right.
The guidance that I've seen, which I'm happy to share, I assume that the governor has seen it, and I'm happy to share with anybody else on this call from Treasury. It's pretty broad in a lot of the uses. They have a list of a non-exclusive list of eligible expenses that includes. It says, for example, very clearly, may a unit of local government receiving a fund, transfer that unit to another unit of government. May a state transfer funds to local governments? Yes, provided that transfer qualifies as a necessary expenditure. So Treasury's been pretty clear about this. I'm not sure why the governor is so cautious about this, but.
Well, let's share the guidance with folks, and I'll talk to the governor, and then we can, if it seems appropriate, we can do a letter to Secretary Mnuchin, and then we can follow up with him.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Thanks for this opportunity to talk directly to you. God bless New Hampshire.
Well, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Ginta. Mayor Hansel from Keene.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you, Senator, and your staff for being so communicative. Very appreciated, and I've had members of your staff join me in different forums we've had for business owners locally. It's been great. Madison specifically has been a real asset.
Thank you.
A lot of what I would talk about has been said. It's actually nice to see that there are the same kind of problems happening in the different communities in New Hampshire. That means we're probably all speaking with the same kind of voice, and hopefully some of these things get addressed. I would just bring up one point about the broadband infrastructure that I'm hearing. Apparently there's a restriction on the funding in the CARES Act that could be used for broadband. Is only 25% of it could be used for, like, quote-unquote, the last mile infrastructure, and the rest is sort of headed for hardware. That's a problem. And while it's all helpful, I would hope in any follow-up infrastructure bill around broadband that we would really start from, the home or the business out as opposed from the provider's needs into the home or business, and make sure that last mile infrastructure is a priority and there's flexibility to use it for that purpose. The other thing I would just point to is higher education in the state. I think higher ed was already going through a transition and already facing some financial pressures, and this COVID-19 emergency has just exacerbated those and applied even additional financial pressures to higher ed. And at the same time, all of the workforce issues that we had before are just coming even more into focus now as well. So like the need for retraining, the need for higher ed to have the ability to step in and fill these holes that exist for our employers is a greater need now than ever. And so I hope that higher ed is supported in any ways possible to adapt and respond to those needs.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Mayor. I had a conversation with the president, Paul LeBlanc at Southern New Hampshire University, about something that they're doing. I haven't seen it replicated yet at the university system, but he said they're designing a whole series of programs that can be done for certifications, for trades, for other IT needs that require only up to 6 months of training, anticipating that not only do we have a number of people out of work, but there are going to be a number of people who are going to move on to a different field, going to be looking for a different job when we get through the pandemic and people are hiring again, and that we need to think about how we can fill those needs. So I think you're right on the money in terms of what we ought to be thinking about. I don't know if you've talked to Keene about whether they're thinking along the same lines. But
I have, and I think it's going to come down to funding innovative ideas. I mean, there are really great people doing a lot of interesting things in the state of New Hampshire around higher ed and in the community college system and elsewhere. If we can figure out how to fund that innovation, facilitate those adaptations, if we can come up with a mechanism to do that, it's just so necessary. And I would hate to have us just stop in our tracks, so to speak, and it would really hurt the state if we don't step up and start innovating. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Hansel. Do we have Mayor Hosmer on the line?
Yes. Good afternoon. How are you?
Hi. Good afternoon.
Thank you to not only you, Senator, but also your staff and the work that's being done here. It is just really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate the work that you're doing on behalf of Granite Staters. Sometimes the word that comes out of Washington seems to me to be a little callous when it comes to the fate of the men and women that we see in cities like Laconia and Keene and Portsmouth and Manchester every single day. So your work is greatly appreciated, and it has an impact on people in our community. So thank you. I don't want to repeat everything that my colleagues have across the state have said, but we are in the midst of budget season right now. Our school system certainly has so many challenges right now associated with remote learning plans and what the next year looks like. They also mentioned something that the need for increased mental health services for our students. So as we go forward, I just hope that education can be a priority. I know that it is, but I just wanted to chime in that regard. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned that I've been working on over the past couple of weeks is in regards to how we're going to handle voting in the upcoming elections here, and do we have adequate funding to make sure that registration by mail and allowing people who are immunosuppressed or unable to get to the polls, that they've got the ability to vote absentee. And I think the Secretary of State is concerned with the integrity of the process in New Hampshire as well. I think what we have found out that the additional $3.2 million in HAVA funds is easy it's easy to go right through that as we try to put plans in place going forward. So I just ask that be a consideration as you continue to work.
Well, thank you. I think it's something that a lot of people are concerned about. Andrew, I certainly share that, and I know there are people here working on a number of pieces of legislation around how do we ensure that everybody gets to vote come November, and that will be part of additional funding in any package that comes out of Congress, I believe, because I think it's such a critical need. And as you point out, the money, the $400 million that we had in the CARES package, doesn't go very far when you think about the challenges we've got with the process. Can you tell me, are you in touch with the Secretary of State on this? And has he talked about
and go ahead.
Just talked about what additional needs he might have?
Well, at this stage right now, the Secretary of State has a select committee led by Brad Cook and Deputy Secretary of State Scanlon, and taking input from groups across the state before they start to issue some directives here. So I'm on the calls 3 days a week, listening to the input and working with the committee to make sure some of these issues are addressed. And we're just waiting for them to wrap up the testimony, so to speak, and then issue some directives here on how we're going to proceed.
Well, great. I hope you'll stay in touch with us on that too, as you get more specifics about what you think we need. And we'll be in touch with that committee. Sarah, I don't know if we've had anybody listening in on their work, but if not, that's probably something we should check in on.
Yeah, we can reach out. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Just checking in on time here, folks. It's just 5 minutes before 2. We do have a little bit of wiggle room, but Senator Shaheen has a hearing after this. So next up we have Mayor Donchis. I know he wasn't able to join, but Cheryl Lindner, his Chief of Staff, is on. Cheryl, do you want to?
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi, how are you, Senator?
Good.
Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with all of us today, and thank you again for all that you and your staff are doing for us during this pandemic. We really appreciate it. The question that we had from Nashua is surrounding hazard pay for our public health nurses. Is there any plan to include them in the group that's eligible for hazard pay? In our community, they're performing the testing and they're doing the contact tracing, and they're also out in the community helping those that are quarantined, and they're not on the list for hazard pay eligibility.
They are on the list if in the House bill that has been introduced. So I think certainly if that bill comes to the Senate, hopefully that will stay in, and it's something that I think we need to support, because those people who are putting their lives at risk to help during this time, I think should see some financial reward as part of what they're doing.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Cheryl. Next up, Sean Mulholland on behalf of Mayor McNamara from Lebanon.
I'll just save my questions for staff later on.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean. Kevin Smith, Londonderry.
Thank you. And Senator, just thank you very much for including us larger towns on this call. Though we're not cities, we're certainly experiencing a lot of the same issues. So I really appreciate you including us on it. And not to sound like a broken record, but your staff has been awesome. They're top notch. And I probably speak for many when I say among the hundreds of emails we get a day, Madison's is clearly one of the most helpful and useful ones we get. It's always got a lot of great information. So kudos to all of them. Just quickly, the only comment I would have is when you're all looking at more stimulus bills and where to allocate monies, we are greatly concerned about the future vitality of our small businesses in our community and throughout all of New Hampshire. Very, very concerned if they're going to make it through this on the back end. And in speaking with them, anything that could be done to help, to maybe give stimulus funds to these small businesses with as few strings attached. As one of them said to me, Kevin, we can't take on any more loans. We could use grants, but just any kind of injection of money to help these small businesses out to survive so that they can get through this, I know would be much appreciated by them and by us, the communities who need these businesses to thrive in our communities.
I certainly agree with that, Kevin. The House package has $10 billion for emergency grants for small businesses through the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. It's something that has been oversubscribed from the very beginning when we first passed those small business provisions. So I think that's very important. There are a couple of other things in the bill that I think will be helpful. One of the things that I've heard from small businesses, and you probably have too, is that the 8-week period that was covered under the Paycheck Protection Program is not long enough. And there is an expansion of that in the House bill, I think, Robert, to 24 weeks. Is that right, or 26 weeks?
It's 24 weeks, Senator. That's correct. And then it also expands the eligible period beyond June 30th all the way to the end of the year,
which I think is very important. And there's also language around the payback period, am I right, that extends,
yes, that's
provides more guidance.
Correct. When the CARES Act came out, said that these loans should mature over the course of 10 years. SBA and Treasury shortened that to 2 years. The House bill would make sure that maturity payback period on these loans would be no less than 5 years,
which hopefully will provide some relief for folks. So
that's great.
I think there is, as I said, bipartisan support that those issues need to be addressed. I know that's true in the Senate because I've talked to Chairman Rubio and Ranking Member Cardin on both those provisions, and they are very supportive.
Great. Well, thank you. I know they'll appreciate it, and keep up the good work.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. David Caron from Derry.
Senator, thanks so much for sharing some time today. 2 quick comments. One is to restate all of our concerns with revenue replenishment. Those in the private sector look to economic downturns and match their staffing levels with their outputs, where on the municipal side, typically the demand for a lot of our services actually increases during economic downturns or times where revenues are not as plentiful. So I'd appreciate any kind of flexibility on that issue. The other one is following up on Kevin's comment. In Derry, we've had sort of a renaissance in arts, and a lot of our centers here, we have several event centers. We have several entertainment venues. We also have the rehabilitation of the old Channel 50 studios into creative arts. And those folks are the ones which we all anticipate will have the longest recovery period. So when the federal government thinks about supporting small businesses, if they can keep in mind the long-term recovery tail that these folks are going to be seeing. I know a lot of these event centers had all their events canceled through the end of the calendar year, and they're not going to bounce back as fast. So any kind of attention you folks can provide to them would be greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you. And they do know that I would assume if they have under 500 employees that they can apply for the PPP program. So
yes,
hopefully they all know that.
Sure. And thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Eileen from Merrimack.
Hello, Senator.
Hi, Eileen.
How are you?
Good. Nice to be talking to you about something other than PFAS.
No kidding, huh? So thank you again, as Dave was just saying, for including us towns that have larger populations. We are facing, there was some discussion about elections, and people are getting concerned about elections in November. However, we, as a community with 28,000 people, are facing an election because we haven't had one yet, our local election. Normally we have it in March, and it's been postponed, and so consequently, we're on a fiscal year, so our year ends on June 30th. But we're going to have to participate or hold an election at the end of June. So we've been in contact with the Secretary of State's office and the Attorney General's office about how we'll actually do that. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is sending out self-addressed stamped envelopes for people to return their absentee ballots.
Wow.
So it's going to be quite the thing. So the other thing is, so we're all getting, as one of the callers had mentioned, we're all getting money based on from the CARES Act through the state, based on the population of our community. So Merrimack is getting a little over $600,000 in this money that we can use, but we have to get reimbursed for it. We have to submit for reimbursement. But as has been said, some of the limited amounts of things that it applies to are so small that we'll never be able to reach that. And yet we have there's a couple of state sources that I'm particularly concerned about that have been mentioned also, rooms and meals taxes and highway block grants, in which we get approximately $2 million. So we're going to be not applying for a significant amount of the $600,000 that we're entitled to apply for because we don't have those types of expenses. So the most important thing that I can ask you is, I believe I heard you say New Hampshire is going to be getting $61 million for testing.
Right.
Is that right? Okay. Where are these tests coming from? And I really would love to know why no one in the whole federal government knows why we don't have adequate testing available to us at this point. Even if we had $100 million or $1 billion, the testing is not available.
It is a continuing frustration, Eileen. The lack of testing and the lack of personal protective equipment has been one of the biggest challenges from the beginning. And the answer that I've gotten, and I don't know if there was yesterday on television, there was a hearing with Dr. Fauci from National Institutes of Health. So if you saw that, you saw that there was not really an adequate answer from any of them to the testing question, and it was a concern raised by both Republicans and Democrats on the committee. Mm-hmm. So it is a continuing frustration. One of the challenges, I think, is that much of our supply chain has been offshored and is not being produced in the United States anymore. I think that's why the Defense Production Act was so important, to invoke that and begin to produce some of these things in the United States. The same is true of the personal protective equipment. We should not be reliant on China for the personal protective equipment we need in the United States. We should be able to produce that ourselves. And so I share that frustration and concern, and I think that's why the Congress has continued to put additional funding in to try and ramp up the testing. I think there is a provision in that last $25 billion for testing, which is where the $61 million for New Hampshire is coming from, that there be a report from the administration by the end of May, I think it's May 24th, as to what the plan is for testing and contact tracing as we begin to reopen the economy. So it is an ongoing frustration, and if anyone on the call has thoughts about people we should engage with us to help with this, please let me know. We are getting better, as you heard yesterday, but we are not where we need to be on testing.
It just seems it seems impossible to me, with all the innovation and all the all the medical geniuses in our country and facilities, that we couldn't put together those test kits, because I know myself and most other people would feel really good to know whether or not you had it, or you've had it, or you have it. It would also, if we found out that 50% of the public had already had COVID-19, it would reduce percentage-wise the number of deaths there are to the number of cases there are, and I think it would make us all feel so much better, not worse. So
well, I agree.
I think I'm preaching the choir here,
for sure.
So I apologize, going off on a tangent.
No. I share the concern, and hopefully we will just we've got to keep at it, got to keep pushing.
Yes. Yes, I understand.
Good. Thank you,
Okay.
Eileen. And last up, we have Chris Dillon from Salem. Chris, if you're still on the line, don't forget to unmute.
He may have had to get off for some reason.
Yeah, he may have had to drop off. That's the end of our list, Senator. I know you need to get to a hearing, so if you want to if there's any last final closing remarks you want to make here.
Well, again, just to thank everybody and to say I hope you will keep in touch with us if there are specific provisions that you want us to take a look at. Several came up on the call around things that you think we ought to be looking at. I hope you will share those with us. The more specific you can be, the better we can help advocate and try and get changes. And there are several things that we've promised on this call, so we will follow up and make sure that folks get both the information and that if there are things we can do to address, for example, the ability to share that $1.25 billion with cities and towns, we will definitely do that, and just really appreciate what everybody is doing on a daily basis to address the concerns in your communities. So thanks. We will stay in touch with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.